bright future. Every student matters.
So let's move to the next question. So children, the next question is, how will you separate a mixture of sand and water? So children, how we can do this? Suppose we have a beaker, we have some amount of sand and water. So we will let it sit for a while and we will observe this that this sand will settle down at the bottom of the beaker, and we can call this sand as sediment because it has sedimented at the bottom of the container, right? Now we can just tilt this a little bit and collect the water in some other beaker, and this sand will be left behind, and this process will be known as decantation, right? And but children, you will observe that the sand left behind even after decantation has some amount of water. So we can separate this by using the process of filtration, right? And how we can do this? We can make use of filter paper. We can make use of filter paper and we can fold it in such a way that it forms a cone, and we can place it in the funnel and pour the mixture of sand and water into it. Sand particles will be collected at the filter paper, whereas water can be collected in some other beaker. So this is the process wherein we are using three processes simultaneously. First we use sedimentation, then we did decantation, and finally with the help of filtration we separated the mixture of sand and water. Okay, so let's move to the next question. How can you obtain clear water from muddy water? So children, you have some muddy water. How you can obtain clear water solution? By the method of filtration. How we can do this? We can use a filter paper which is quite porous, but it will allow only water to pass through it. It will not allow the mud to pass through it, and mud will be collected over this filter paper, whereas water can be the clean water can be collected in some other beaker or a conical flask. Okay. So let's move to the next question. What type of substances can be hand-picked, separated by hand-picking? So children, only those substances can be separated using hand-picking, wherein we have to separate only small amount, right? Like we have a mixture of rice which contains some impurities, maybe broken rice pieces, there may be some stones. These can be removed with the help of hand-picking. Okay. Then children, what are the different methods of separation that we have studied up till now? So children, we studied first about hand picking, then we did threshing. After threshing, we discussed about sieving. After sieving, we discussed about winnowing. We discussed about winnowing. Finally, we discussed about the three processes which were 5, 6 and 7, which were sedimentation, decantation and filtration. So these are the children methods of separation that we have studied up till now. These are hand picking, threshing, sieving, winnowing, sedimentation, decantation and filtration. We have discussed everything in detail. And children, suppose if this question is asked as a 3 marker, okay, if it is asked as a 3 marker, then you will just have to name all of these. But if this question is asked as a 5 marker, then you will have to give the definitions of each of these processes of separation. Okay, so that's it guys. These were the question and answers from the topic that we have covered so far. Children, we are going to discuss some of the questions from the topic that we have covered so far. So children, in this topic we discussed about evaporation. So the question is based on evaporation. So let's just begin and read the first question, which says, how do you separate salt from water? And every one of us knows that salt can be very easily separated from water by the process of evaporation. So let us now quickly discuss about the process which has to be followed, the procedure. Suppose we have this beaker which contains a mixture of water and salt. So what we are going to do is we will start heating it using a Bunsen burner or stove heater, as you wish. You can heat it by any means, and when you will heat it, the water will be evaporated, whereas the salt will be left behind in this beaker. So children, this is the process of evaporation. through which we can separate the mixture of salt and water. Let's move to the next question. Children, what is evaporation and where is it used? So children, evaporation means when the water from the liquid state is converted into its gaseous state is known as evaporation. But this definition, most of the children give this definition, but this is incomplete. You will have to write when water from the liquid state gets converted into gaseous state on heating. This is the key word, children, on heating. You have to write this. If you don't write this, your half mark will be deducted, because this question can usually be asked for a 2-marker question if its uses are also asked. If the uses are not asked, then it will be asked as a 1-marker question. Okay. So evaporation means the conversion of water from liquid to the gaseous state on heating is called as evaporation. And one of the most important use of evaporation is that it is used to separate salt from seawater, right? It is used to separate salt from seawater. We are going to discuss the question and answers from the topics that we have covered. So children, the first question is how you can separate a mixture of salt and sand. So we have a mixture of sand and salt. So how we can separate it? Let's discuss about all the methods of separation that we have discussed so far and decide which of the method will be appropriate to separate this mixture. So children, we have discussed about hand picking. So can we hand pick salt or sand from this mixture? Definitely we cannot, because the size of these particles is very small. Both the particles are very small, so we cannot separate it using hand picking, right? Then can we separate it using threshing? No children, threshing cannot be done, because if we try to beat it, they will be converted into even finer powder, even fine powder, right? So we cannot use threshing. So can we use sieving? So children, can we use sieving to separate the mixture of salt and sand? No children, we cannot use sieving, because sieving can be used if one of the particles from the mixture has a larger size, but sand and salt are kind of almost similar sizes, so we cannot use sieving also. So children, we are now left with winnowing. Can we do winnowing? No, again winnowing cannot be done, because none of the particles is too light to be carried away with to be completely carried away with the help of wind. So children, what we can do is we can make use of the property whether or not one of the particle is soluble in water or not. And we know that salt is soluble in water, whereas sand is insoluble in water. So what we are going to do is we will take a beaker. In this beaker we will add water as well as our mixture of sand and salt. We will pour the mixture of sand and salt into it, and we will give it a quick stir, and you will observe that salt will dissolve in, you cannot see this, but we know that the salt will be dissolved in water, whereas the sand after some time will be settled at the bottom of this beaker in the form of a sediment. Now what we can do is, children, we can carry out the process of decantation. So children, after decantation, the water which has the salt dissolved in it can be collected in this sample. But since even the sediment will contain some amount of water, so the last mixture of sediment and water can be separated using filtration. So in this way, children, we can completely separate the mixture of sand and salty water. Okay children? So salty water, right? Now we have this salty water. Now we have already separated sand and salt, but the salt is in dissolved form. Now what we can do is we can use the process of evaporation to separate salt from this mixture of water. Salt and water can be separated by the process of evaporation. So children, I'll quickly repeat what all we have done. We have decided that the best method to separate the mixture of sand and salt is by using its property whether or not any of the component is soluble in water or not. And we know that salt is soluble in water. So we will add water and the mixture into a beaker containing water, right? Now the salt will be dissolved in the water, right? And the sand will settle down at the bottom of the container. So this process is, the first process which we used is sedimentation, right? After that we did decantation and filtration. Decantation and filtration. In order to separate the mixture of salty water into another beaker, and sand will be collected in the filter paper after doing filtration, right? After this, children, we did evaporation in order to obtain the dissolved salt from the water. The water will be evaporated, whereas the beaker will be left behind with salt. So this is the complete process. So you can see we have used more than one method of separation. We have used four methods of separation over here in the same activity, right? So children, in this way you can learn how you can use more than one method of separation also. Okay, let's move to the next question. Children, what is condensation? Give an example from daily life. So children, condensation is the process in which water vapor gets converted back into liquid state on cooling. Again children, the definition will be incomplete if you don't write that it becomes liquid on cooling. This is the key word here. And what is the example of it? The example can be, take out a chilled water bottle from refrigerator and keep it in the room temperature. After some time you will observe water droplets forming on the outer surface of the bottle. So from where has this water come? Has this come from inside the bottle? No, it is not coming from bottle, because the cap or the lid of this bottle is closed, right? So this water has come from the atmosphere, because we know in atmosphere we have water vapor, and when the water vapor comes in contact with this cold water bottle, it cools down and it is condensed to form liquid droplets. Okay, so this is the example of condensation from daily life. And how we can define condensation? Condensation is the process wherein water vapor is converted back into the liquid state on cooling. Okay, so this was all about the question and answers from the session that we have covered so far. We are going to discuss some of the question and answers from the topics that we have covered so far. So children, the first question is, can water dissolve any amount of salt in it? No children, water cannot dissolve any amount of salt in it, and we can discuss this with the help of an activity. Suppose we take a beaker and we start dissolving salt in it, spoon by spoon. Okay, so if we start by dissolving 1, 2, 3, 4, you will observe that at certain point, maybe at 7th spoon, you will observe that this water cannot dissolve any more amount of salt in it, and this point is known as the point of saturation, right? So children, the stage when the water cannot dissolve any more amount of water in it is called as saturated water. So the answer to this question is no, the water cannot dissolve any amount of salt in it. Okay. So children, the next question is, when we recover salt from water by evaporation, is the amount of salt recovered same as it was dissolved? Actually children, we had discussed an activity wherein Paheli was confused about the case of missing salt, because what we did was, if you remember the activity where we had separated salt from the mixture of sand by dissolving it in water, because the salt dissolves in water, whereas sand was removed as the sediment. It was settled as a sediment, then it was filtered and decantation was done, and later the salt was recovered by the process of evaporation. But Paheli observed that the salt recovered was not same as the salt which was dissolved in it. So children, what might have happened was, the complete salt was not dissolved in water. Why? Because the water might have reached its point of saturation and it was not able to dissolve any more amount of salt in it. So it was separated along with the sand, because it was not dissolved in water, so it might have been there in the form of sediment, right? So when we did decantation and filtration, some of the amount of salt went along with the sediment and was and would be there in the filter paper while we were filtering it, right? So this is due to the reason that the salt had reached its point of saturation and was no longer able to dissolve all the salt, and that is why after evaporation in that activity the salt recovered was not same as that which was dissolved in it. Okay. The next question is, what is saturated solution? Question number 3, we have what do you mean by saturated solution? So children, it is the solution wherein no more salt can be dissolved into water is known as saturated solution. Okay. Then the last question is, can we alter the amount of salt dissolved in water? Yes children, we can definitely alter the amount of salt which is dissolved in water by heating it, right? Suppose the limit of this beaker containing water is 7 teaspoons, right? After 7 teaspoon it was not able to dissolve any more amount of salt in it. So at this point, if we start heating it, you will observe that it will start dissolving all the salt in it, and it can dissolve even more salt in it. Okay. So we can increase this point of saturation or increase the amount of salt which can be dissolved in it by providing it heat or heating it. Okay. So these were all the question and answers from the session, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed it and understood the concept really well.